Während wir umbauen, darf ich die nächste Referentin begrüßen. Snehal Anni ist currently a doctoral student at the Institute for Theatre Studies at Freie Universität Berlin. There she is the recipient of a 6-month research fellowship at the Cluster of Excellence Temporal Communities, doing literature in a global perspective. I think, Snehal, you just arrived this fall in Berlin? No? You've been here for a while, but you received the scholarship for the cluster. Her research primarily focuses on colonial history, postcolonial theory, and translation studies, with a particular interest in South Asian history. She has completed her bachelor's and master's in English literature from the University of Delhi. She has also worked as an assistant professor and taught English literature at Zakir Hussain Delhi College at the University of Delhi. And her current research deals with the documentation of the translation process of selected Brecht's translated or adapted plays for performance in the post-colonial Hindi language theatrical landscape. And I suppose that your presentation today is coming forth from this very current research. The respondent to this presentation has just disappeared. Please make your entrance. That's very clever. He'll have a very good entrance. Micha Braun. He will be responding to this presentation. He is the vice president of the International Brecht Society, and he will be very happy about many new membership applications to the Bertolt Brecht Society. He is working at the Department of Theater Studies, Theaterwissenschaft at Leipzig University, where he is also the co-director of the Center of Competence for Theater. And now we are hearing a presentation on the politics of translation, Brecht's place in post-colonial Hindi theater. And Snehal is going to present in English, and I think we have enough international competences in the room to be able to allow for questions in German as well as in English following this presentation.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and I hope I'll be able to paint a picture of what was going on in the Hindi theater from 1960s to 1990. So as you might notice in the title of this presentation, that I have used Brecht's name in Hindi language and in English, and you might wonder that why it's English and Hindi rather than German and Hindi, given that I'm discussing translation of Brecht's work. So this is to highlight in the title itself that many of Brecht's productions in Hindi were translations of translation, rather than the direct engagement with the original German plays. And this reflects the existing language hierarchy, where English often mediated access to his plays. So to begin with my presentation, Bertolt Brecht's legacy in India is not just one of artistic admiration, but a political and cultural dialogue that has persisted for decades. While the introduction and popularization of Brechtian theater was instrumental in reviving and experimenting with the genre of political theater, but it also delved into pressing issues of the time, serving the evolving realities and socio-political interests of post-independent India. Hence, since the 1950s, his plays have been significantly translated and adapted into numerous regional theatrical languages of India, reflecting the intricate journey of his revolutionary ideas throughout the prism of India's diverse theatrical traditions. The deliberate effort to translate Brecht's work into various theatrical languages and cultures, both at institutional and independent theater group levels. And here is a very rough but incomplete list of adaptations and translations that have been done in different Indian languages from 1960s onwards. And it's very, very incomplete because there is not much record of what was happening. Facilitated a rich tapestry of interpretations and motivations behind it, resulting in a surge in translation and adaptation activities that acted as catalysts for the proliferation of Brechtian theatre across India. However, this movement of Brechtian thought through translations raises critical questions about the challenges in the circulation of political aesthetics in global setting. What happens when revolutionary ideas cross borders and embed themselves in new political realities? Each stage of such a translation journey, from script development to rehearsals to post-production, plays a vital role in bringing the theatrical production to life, ensuring that the final performance is engaging and impactful. Hence, when a script of a play by Brecht, rooted in a European socio-political framework, gets translated, it opens up questions as to how it was reimagined for a post-colonial landscape to retain its episodic structures, use of songs, and direct audience engagement. What were the political and social circumstances in which Brecht's ideas were imported and in which translations of his work were made? How did Hindi theatre, in particular, reinterpret Brecht's work to meet its own unique political, social, and aesthetic needs in a post-colonial setting? What were the challenges and obstacles faced in finding a political and cultural equivalent when translating Brecht's plays in a country with a colonial past that gained its freedom from Britain not long ago? Hence, the translation process becomes a site of negotiation, addressing the various facets of theatre, such as costume, gestures, songs, body movement, stage setup, use of lighting and makeup, among others, that are also meticulously translated, or much improvisations are done, to reveal the mechanism of social relations and actively shape the political consciousness of the audience, forging a uniquely Indian interpretation of his revolutionary theatre. Such a maneuver positions the Hindi productions of Brecht as the focal point in this research. Hence, in this presentation, I intend to explore how and why selected Brecht's plays were translated and performed on the post-colonial Hindi stage, document the intricacies of translating these selected plays, and focus on the influence and impact on the socio-political dimensions that shape and are shaped by theatrical expressions. Towards this end, I will share analysis of my case studies here, which is a translated script of Brecht's one-act play titled The Informer or Der Spitzel, which was translated as Ghar Ka Bhedi in Hindi language by Rakesh Kumar Sharma. Insights from interviews of theatre director Amal Alana and translator Sohail Hashmi, which I conducted for my project between October 2023 and March 2024. These interviews provide a nuanced understanding of the lived experiences of the translator and director working on translation of Brecht's plays, encapsulating the collaborative effort in theatrical translation and the objective behind the choice of translating a selected play of Brecht, highlighting how the translation of these plays is not simply a theatrical performance, but a political act that amplified local voices and challenged social norms. Now, before I get into the case study, I would like to briefly outline here that one of the challenges I encountered was the lack of proper documentation or archiving practice up until 1989 in the theatre archives in India concerning Hindi theatre only in this case, that has created a significant gap in my findings and effort to capture the whole essence of the translation process of Brecht's play. For instance, where I have managed to secure the script translated for performance, there are no video recordings, photographs, or reviews by theater critics that I could access of performances of the same play. And I have also mentioned another problem over here. Despite these challenges, the material that I have managed to procure will be an entry point into scrutinizing and analyzing the translation process of Brecht's plays in a different socio-political context. To address these gaps and constraints, I employ a patchwork ethnography approach to work with fragments and absences in my findings to delve into the socio-political dimensions and use translation as a lens to define and assess the dynamics of the post-colonial theatrical landscape. Each fragment of the collected material analyzed here offers a glimpse into the different elements that form a part of the intricate, layered, and dynamic process of translating Brecht. Although the case studies may seem disjointed, yet when viewed collectively, these patches come together to form a nuanced and layered portrait of translating Brecht using another translation, embodying the principles of patchwork ethnography. So in this next section, I will present my findings, positioning the act of translating Brecht's plays for the Hindi stage at the center to unfold the intricate political strategies, cultural negotiations, and collaborative processes that transform these performances into powerful socio-political critique within a turbulent historical context of the target language. I will start with the interview of a translator, Sohail Hashmi. Sohail Hashmi is an oral historian of Delhi, translator, social activist, filmmaker, and heritage conservationist. Hashmi has translated a few plays during the 70s for performance by the Student Theatre Group and worked on the translation of few of Brecht's plays from English into Hindi language or Hindustani dialect, such as In Search of Justice, The Informer, and Chalk Cross. In conversation with Hashmi about his process of translating Brecht's plays for performance, some of the key themes and insights addressed include, firstly, Hashmi's use of the English translation of Brecht's plays and theories when translating the selected plays. He points out that he did not have access to the German language, and in recollection of his memory from the time, he points out that he heard Brecht's name for the first time in 1969 and took the initiative to read several of his works which were available in English. He mentions that the long discussions with the theatre group about Brecht's techniques and theories were crucial for understanding and translating the script. The entire cast engaged in these discussions to fully grasp the Brechtian method and faithfully staged the play. Secondly, the 3 short one-act plays of Brecht that he translated were during the emergency period. To briefly give an idea what emergency period was, it's in the slide. I'm not going to read it. He recalls the backdrop amidst which these plays were translated was when university spaces were being raided and monitored, and censorship was at an all-time high. Hence, the purpose behind translating selected Brecht's plays at the time in these university spaces, where the target audience was the university students, was to address the politically volatile situation and to mobilize support or resistance against the authoritarian regime. To quote him, "Play was done for a political purpose, so one wanted to make sure that what the play is saying gets across or gets communicated." His remark highlights that translating Brecht's plays into Hindi was an active engagement with the target culture's socio-political issues, addressing the political crisis of the time. Thirdly, he points out that when the rehearsal starts, the script enters the spoken realm of language, where the focus shifts onto dialogic exchange between characters, which goes through several changes during rehearsals to capture the essence of Brechtian play that the translator needs to accommodate, such as reworking of sentences, of phrases, or pauses here and there, and so on. Another important role for him as a translator was to work on inflection. He cites an example that during rehearsals, actors who have not much read or spoken Urdu and do not come from that milieu have trouble with pronunciation of certain words and dialogue delivery. For example, fruit in Hindustani is phal, but the sound of fa is absent in the Indian language, and it comes from Persian in Hindustani. And then his job as a translator was to sit down and work with the actors on inflection and pronunciation. Thus, Hashmi's recollection of his experience of translating Brecht's plays for Hindi stage during a politically turbulent time foregrounds the intersection of theater, translation, and activism. The choice of doing translation of these plays by Hashmi and his theater group during the emergency period emerges here as not mere cultural exchange, but as an active engagement with the political crisis, aiming to raise awareness and resistance among university students. His account reveals, by staging these plays in university spaces, they were able to bypass broader censorship under an authoritarian regime. Through the strategic use of foreign playwrights' works, these productions addressed local political struggles, resonating with the political themes in the plays and directly engaging a young critical audience. My next case study is the script, the translated script of Brecht's play, The Informer, translated as Ghar Ka Bedi, dated 6th May 1982, by Rakesh Kumar Sharma for National School of Drama in Hindi language. The translation of the play has been done from English language into Hindi. This play is a translation of a translation. Like many of the translations and adaptations done in Hindi theatre, where most translators and directors work together with Brecht's works, mostly from the English language, due to not knowing German. To very briefly summarize this Brecht's one-act play, The Informer or Der Spitzel, from his work Fürst und Elend des Dritten Reich, explores parental anxiety and mistrust within a family in Nazi Germany, where a son's loyalty to the Hitler Youth threatens to expose his father's critical views of the regime. The play examines themes of betrayal, paranoia, and the devastating impact of totalitarianism on personal relationships. To begin with my analysis briefly of the translated script of this play in Hindi, without doing a detailed word-for-word or comparative study of scripts, the translation retained the original German names of the characters, such as Herr and Frau Klimt, the name of the son Klaus Heinrich, and so on. The backdrop of the play is retained in Hindi translation as well, where the couple lives in 1936 Nazi Germany. The language used is Hindustani dialect, which is a mix of Hindi and Urdu spoken in North India, Pakistan, and Deccan. The translated play has essentially maintained the closeness and proximity to the original play text. In this case, the source will be the translated English text, except for very minor changes that were made in the script. One of the minor changes that was made when the husband replies to his wife's argument, saying, "It's not a matter of indifference for our people if they can't think of a church without also thinking of such abominations." In the English translation, the word church is connected to abominations, whereas in Hindi, the translator has used the word dharm, and I have highlighted that in yellow, which is religion instead of church. The choice of word here to use religion or dharm in this context makes it a sharper critique of the Indian socio-political landscape, which deals with diverse religions coexisting and battling all sorts of religious politics. Another minor change in the translated script shows that the translator here went for the cultural adaptation to capture the essence of the idiomatic expression. During the moment of paranoia, when the couple started believing that their son had betrayed them and has informed on them, the husband says in frustration, "You bore me a Judas." The word Judas here, symbolic of betrayal, disloyalty, or deceit, has been translated into Hindi as Vibhishana. Vibhishana is the younger brother of Ravan, king of Lanka, in the ancient Indian epic of Ramayana, where he turned his back on his brother Ravan and joined the side of Lord Rama in the Lanka war. Although there are varying interpretations of his actions, one of the perspectives views him as a betrayer, which is a fairly popular expression in the target language, than Judas, and hence the use of the term Vibhishana helps capture the effect of the original dialogue that is familiar and relevant for the target audience, though not as strongly as the word Judas in the original. The translator has attempted to remain faithful to the source play text and preserve its essence, language, theme, and nuances in the target language. The script relies on spoken Hindi to maintain the dialogic nature of a play. Furthermore, this brief examination of the short translated play raises questions such as why did the translator choose this play to translate rather than adapt in 1982? What was the political crisis that this translated play of Brecht addressed on the Hindi stage? To trace back our steps to India in 1982, which was marked by several significant events and crises reflecting the complex socio-political landscape of the nation. The monumental event of the time was that Indira Gandhi came back into power in 1980 as the Prime Minister of the nation after the controversial and infamous events of the emergency period. She was eventually assassinated. The period between 1980 to 84, where Indira Gandhi came back to power, was marked by significant crises such as the Punjab insurgency, the Assam agitation, a significant rise in communal tension and unrest, anti-Sikh riots, and broader political instability, which had a profound impact on the nation's political dynamics, communal relations, and socio-economic conditions. During such a socio-political crisis in India, the purpose of translating Brecht's political play, The Informer, which explores the impact of authoritarian regimes and the reach of state control, signifies the choice of translating this particular play, appears to be a strategic decision on behalf of the translator to address the political unrest of the time through theater, foregrounding how translation can be very well used as a powerful political tool in challenging power structures. Hence, this choice to translate with subtle modifications enabled the play to serve as a form of resistance against the authoritarian regime, bypassing censorship and avoiding direct scrutiny as a threat to state control. In contrast to this, around the same period, M.K. Raina's adaptation of Brecht's Caucasian Chalk Circle into Punjabi Parai Cook 1976 was banned, and Raina was reportedly placed on the unofficial Greta list, which is the grinder of revolutionary elements in troubled areas, used during India's emergency to monitor dissenters. The next case study is the interview of theatre director Amal Alana. Amal Alana is an Indian theatre director who majored in directing at the National School of Drama, Delhi in 1968. Her fascination with Brecht's work started with two productions. The first was the 1968 production of Caucasian Chalk Circle in Hindustani dialect by Carl Weber, done in Delhi at NSD, and second, the 1970 production of the Three-Penny Opera in Hindustani dialect under direction of Fritz Benowitz at National School of Drama, where she was assistant director and designed the costumes for the show. She has directed over 60 productions in Hindi language and has worked on the most number of translations and adaptations of Brecht's plays in India. To briefly mention a few of the plays that Alana has worked on, both translations and adaptations of Brecht's plays, are The Good Woman of Szechuan, Exception and the Rule, Mother Courage and Her Children, The Three-Penny Opera, Elephant Calf, Scenes from Fear and Misery of the Third Reich, and few more. Some of the key themes explored from director's point of view in this conversation were, firstly, the first point to consider before looking into translations was the state of Hindi theatre from 1960s to 90s. Alana points out that during this timeline, Hindi stage was yet to be explored as it was the, and I quote her, last language to have theatre in the 1960s. It was still evolving at the time and navigating through a newly independent landscape of the country, when with much experimentation and contribution of many Hindi theatre personalities of the time, such as theater director Raina, it slowly started to evolve and discover various vernacular dialects spoken across the northern belt and more in India, which were then strategically used for a well-structured play for the stage. She points out that this exploration of various dialects of spoken Hindi was utilized when translating Brecht's plays, in deciding which dialect or accent to give to which character and helped in adding texture to the language. The strategic and nuanced use of dialects and accents added not only depth to the characters but also mirrored the complexities of society, making the play accessible to the target audience while maintaining its integrity and political edge as the original. Secondly, she foregrounds some of the challenges that come specifically when translating Brecht's plays into Hindi language. And I would share an excerpt here from the interview. To summarize this excerpt, it highlights here that the translating process of Brecht's work into Hindi is not merely a linguistic exercise of finding word-for-word equivalents, but involves a deep understanding of the cultural, performative, and rhythmic elements attached to each word and phrase. A big challenge is constructing Brechtian sentences in Hindi, which translators must consider along with how each word resonates within the target language and culture, while also ensure that the dialogue remains speakable and performable for actors on stage. Once the translated script reaches the rehearsal phase and the actors become involved, collaborative creative decisions lead to reworking and refining the text, allowing for adjustments and improvisations to emerge, and everything evolves during the performance. Furthermore, as Brecht's writing style often includes disjointed staccato sentences, the challenge for translators and actors alike is to navigate these abrupt transitions without traditional linguistic connectors. The decision to either bridge these gaps or leave them disjointed becomes a crucial interpretative choice for the director that can dramatically affect the overall performance. This complexity highlights the delicate balance between linguistic fidelity and performative fluidity, underscoring the intricate art of theatrical translation. Thirdly, the emphasis on the political edge and cultural dissonance. Alana highlights this by referencing her work on Exception and the Rule, where she deliberately used costumes, such as dressing characters in Arab outfits while they spoke Hindi, to create cultural dissonance. This clash between the visual and linguistic elements, she argues, was her attempt to create that cultural dissonance and strangeness. The dissonance not only unsettles the audience but also amplifies the play's political message, a core element in Brechtian theatre. In critically assessing Alana's approach, one could argue that her insistence on dissonance serves a dual purpose. It ensures that the translation is not domesticated to fit comfortably within the target culture, and it sustains Brecht's original intent of activating the audience's critical faculties. However, while dissonance may serve as a useful tool to provoke thought, the risk is that excessive cultural incongruity could alienate the audience to the point where they disengage from the performance. Balancing this tension, keeping the audience engaged while maintaining a critical distance, becomes the key challenge for directors working with Brecht's plays in translation. Alana's methods offer a valuable model for this balancing act, though the success of this approach would ultimately depend on the director's skill and vision for the play. Lastly, she highlights the multifaceted role of both political engagement and directorial choices in her translation of Brecht's works. The political relevance of these translations was paramount, as they directly addressed pressing socio-political issues of the time. She cites some of the productions she worked on, such as The Informer, which addressed the Punjab crisis of the 1980s, The Jewish Wife, critiqued the rising religious intolerance in India, and Mother Courage coincided around the time with the Babri Masjid incident, capturing how religious intolerance was fracturing society at multiple levels. She emphasizes that these productions weren't simply artistic ventures, but deliberate responses to address the political crisis. They were part of a broader movement within Hindi theatre, a concerted effort by theatre practitioners to engage in politically charged productions, each tackling these issues through different lenses. Moreover, she describes her directorial approach as collaborative effort and notes that her method involved constant interaction with translators, actors, musicians, and other members of the creative team, making space for improvisation. She underscores how the script is not a static entity, but one that evolves during rehearsals. Thus, as a director, Amal Alana's role involved making critical decisions on elements like use of space, body movements, set design, costumes, lighting, and even how to handle pauses and sentence breaks in Brecht's staccato writing style. These decisions were crucial in ensuring that the production did not simply replicate Brecht's European sensibility, but adapted it meaningfully for an Indian audience, achieving what Brecht originally intended, to foster critical distance and reflection. In critically analyzing her approach, it is clear that Alana's directorial efforts reflect a careful balancing act, staying true to the original political intent of Brecht's plays, while also adapting them to the cultural and political landscape of India. However, every director who has their own vision and approach towards translating Brecht's plays adds their quirks and style to it according to their understanding of Brechtian theatre and their objective or intent behind doing the production, which raises the question that, can the translated production of Brecht for Hindi stage, despite attempting to preserve integrity of original, can it truly be very close to original? To quote Alana herself, "So how do you do justice to that work of art which now you're putting into translation? It's practically an impossible thing." To conclude, collectively these case studies reveal the journey of Brecht's work in India, transcends artistic influence to become a profound example of translation as a tool for political and cultural transformation. Unlike quintessential transnational exchanges, Brecht's introduction into post-colonial Hindi theatre not only adapted his techniques, but fundamentally altered the local theatrical landscape, sparking a tradition of socially engaged and political performances. This paper demonstrates that by continually reshaping Brecht's work to mirror the political struggles and cultural shifts of each era, Hindi theatre has created a uniquely Indian Brechtian tradition, one that also reveals the power of translation to catalyze local resistance and amplify voices within an unstable, violent, and chaotic political era. A somewhat recent example of this can be seen in the 2004 production of Brecht's Antigone, directed by Anuradha Kapoor and Ian Lal. This production incorporated modern technology using documentary footage of the 2002 Gujarat riots alongside the film testimony of the victims to blend with Brecht's text. This dynamic reinterpretation of Brecht suggests that translation, when rooted in the political context, does not merely transmit ideas, but actively reshapes them to serve as enduring forms of cultural resistance. In this light, Brecht's legacy in India is a reminder that translation can be a transformative political act, constructing new spaces for dialogue and dissent within the constraints of inherited cultural frameworks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No. All right. Okay. So once again, thank you, Snehal, for the fascinating and multi-layered, especially across the case studies, insights into the reception of Brecht in India on the one hand, and as well as the glimpse into your specific and particular research work and the intricacies and challenges of such a dissertation. As before, we would like to open the discussion firstly to the peers. So who wants to comment or react onto that presentation? Mike is coming.
Yeah, thank you so much. Super interesting.
Thank you.
I didn't know anything about it. And I was wondering if you learned from your interview partners something about if this reception and translation processes was somehow the result of, I don't know, an international exchange between the students' theaters, the international ones, and also, yeah, because we recently learned in the archives of the Humboldt University that there was an, great effort in internationalizing the students' theater groups. And the second thing is because you dropped the name of Fritz Benewitz, and he was a member of the Akademie der Künste. And the second question, if this is also somehow a result of I know that the GDR tried to export Brechtian plays, for example, in form of the Modellbücher and stuff like this, the material documentation. And if you, I don't know, learned from your interview partners if they used material like this because they, they were sent to them.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, I mean, I did not have much time to address everything about the translation, but yes, I mean, there have been multiple approaches, one at the institutional level, which you're talking about, the international exchanges. And when it comes to the institutional level, then yes, there was effect of the international exchange that was happening and how GDR was sending directors from East Germany over there to teach about Brecht. But there were independent theater groups as well who were not part of these institutions, and they were working on these translations by themselves or doing adaptations of it because they resonated with the political message and they wanted to address the political crisis. So there were on a parallel level, many things were happening. And the second question was on Fritz Benewitz.
Yeah, so the one part is the exchange between international students. Yes. This could be an institutional aspect, but also
Yes, with Fritz Benewitz, yes, it started with the international exchange, but I think over the time he was not satisfied initially with how the translation was received when he was working at the institutional level. So then he started collaborating with theater directors and doing adaptations over the time to localize it. I don't know if I should give my opinion on that if I would agree with the localization aspect. But then he worked with many theater directors over the time to localize the plays and to adapt it in the Indian context. But it initially started with institutional exchange. Thank you. Thank you.
Further comments, remarks, questions? There will be more time, of course. Okay, so I will start with my short reply that I have to start, of course, with so I should just say at the outset that I am no expert on theater in India, nor on the reception of Brecht on the Asian continent in general, where, to my knowledge, he has been the subject of some controversy in recent years, at least, as well as on Brecht's own relationship to Asian theater practices and the whole discourse on appropriation and cultural transfer. Therefore, I would like to focus on two questions regarding your particular approach on Brecht's reception in India. First, the question of translation on the one hand, and that of his political relevance on the other. So, and I merely provide a catalog of questions that I'm not expecting you to answer here, but more, I guess in your dissertation you are answering a lot of them, and this was just a short insight into, as you said before, into one chapter of that work. So I was interested reading your presentation, which of Brecht's other texts, especially beyond the plays, have been translated into Hindi so far. So which framework texts, but also his own annotations and commentaries on the specific plays were received in the Indian context. And further, lies thus the focus of translating Brecht primarily in the content of his plays, or is he rather understood, or is he also understood as a theater theorist and aesthetic innovator? In this regard, you already mentioned Sohail Hashmi in particular, and said that he also engaged in discussions about questions of theatrical aesthetics and methods. And my interest would be then, does that have further implications for Brecht's reception in general? So is he primarily understood as a political author? And the topics of his plays are read as transferable allegories that have meaning also in the Indian context. This would be the first complex. A second thought that was coming to mind is that the close friend and confidant of Brecht, Walter Benjamin, put out a text in 1926, if I remember correctly, on the purpose of translation. And in his opinion, that purpose is not to seek out the familiar in the original text and translate it into one's own idiom, but rather to recognize the foreign of the original and to integrate that foreignness into one's own language. To quote him, formulated from a German perspective, in this text he quotes Rodolf Panwitz, is, quote, "Our translations are based on a false principle, even the best ones. They want to Germanize Indian, Greek, English, rather than to Indianize German, to Greekize English, to Englishize Indian. They have a much greater reverence for their own linguistic customs than for the spirit of the foreign work," end of quote. So Benjamin is thus not looking for a literal transmission of meaning or a literary approximation of languages in the practice of translation, but for the transmission of a core of truth, or what he calls a heat source, an urgency that can be found in the original and that speaks as a longing for language supplementation from the foreign text into the recipient or target language. So, stressing on that interpretation of translating, how do the Hindi translations of Brecht that you are aware of relate to such an approach? Is there, in your experience, in your experience, a transfer of a presumed similarity and kinship between Brecht's thinking and the much later in time terms reality of India, or is Brecht's approach seen as a potentially productive foreign body in the Indian theater context? In this regard, you mentioned in your last case study Aman Alana as an example for productively using Brecht translations as a foreign material that demands decisions as a director and an actor how to enact the original in the target language and culture. Not only to really use it as a rather loose template for playing and acting, but also as a model of cultural dissonance, as you called it, that does not need to be domesticated, but keeps its activating and even irritating power for the audience. In a term of Brecht himself, you could call that the separation of elements that you mentioned in your analysis of the interview with Aman Alana. And lastly, and this is for me also connected to the question of the whole topic is for me also connected to the question of the post-colonial. Why Brecht? How did he become known in India, and what were the reasons for the translations of his work from English, as you mentioned? Or more directly, why is a member of the colonial culture, moreover mediated through the language of the direct colonizers of the Indian subcontinent, translated in order to seek ideas and answers for a post-colonial present and future from him today? Which political topics and approaches, or also which aesthetic methods, can only be found in Brecht's work, justifying his translation? That were my initial thoughts.
Okay. I don't remember all of the questions now, but I think, okay, I'll start with the last question. With the why Brecht? Yes, so after independence, the Hindi theatre was experimenting with a lot of playwrights, not just Brecht, to create its own identity. And I would like to use that as one of the reasons that why Brecht at the institutional level. So there were introduction of many global playwrights, not just Brecht. Why English was used as colonial language? That was a way to access these global playwrights. And also, it also shows the effect of colonization as well. Then, okay, what were the other questions? In briefly, what were...
Yeah, it was more about the question of translation. So how is translating Brecht... I think there is no general answer, because you did it already in 3 case studies, and I guess there are even more. How is the process of translation perceived by the translators? Are they incorporating Brecht's plays into their own thinking about theater, or is it really perceived as something foreign that provokes this dissonance that you mentioned?
Yes. I would not like to generalize that and say this was happening, because every translator or every theater group, every director in every era were doing different things. I stuck to the political crisis because I could connect that, but there were many, many approaches to translation. More than translations, there were adaptations, because it's more closer to the local culture and easier to connect with the audience. But on the level of translations, the reasons for doing it were different for different theater groups. When it comes to independent theater groups, or when it comes to the ones who were funded by institutions, it's very different. And it also depends on the budget that everyone has. Yes, and I think have I answered the question?
I'm totally fine with that.
Okay.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? Yeah, Mark. I give you.
I actually have 3 very brief questions for you. It seems that in using English text, some of the translations were by Mannheim Willett, and at least one was a Bentley translation. Yes. Why was that? Because Bentley generally is considered translator for the American public, much less precise than the Willett and Mannheim translation. So I wonder what was behind that.
It was simply what was available at the time. If I have to give a context, independence happened and everything was very chaotic. So it would still take a lot of time to have those structures. National School of Drama was established in 1959. Yeah. And So everything was taking place slowly. They were still trying to understand what kind of syllabus we should make, what kind of acting style should we do, which playwrights should be introduced. And in that, whatever was available, so very few texts. But over the time, of course, they stocked other translations as well. But in English, Hindi translations, there's still not many publications of it. One might find scripts for performance, but not publications that much. Yeah.
A second question, if I may. Do we have time for that? Yeah. I happened to have had the opportunity to talk to Amal Alana last month at my own campus, the University of Wisconsin, and she made very clear that she was particularly interested in Brecht because of the female figures, Mother Courage, the Jewish wife, Antigone, and you didn't mention that gender aspect of her attraction to Brecht. Is that something that you're interested in?
That is there, but because of the time limit, it would have taken another section to address that. And it's a very important part of Alana's approach, the female figures. And she has experimented with that in one of her adaptations, which is part of a next chapter of mine. This is solely focused on translation. But in adaptation in Mother Courage that she did, she experimented with the female figure, and yeah, that is her strong point over there.
And one last question. When I was talking with Amal Alana, she was actually presenting her father's work, El Akazi, who has set up a huge documentation center and archive, as far as I know, with all of his work establishing the Hindi National Theater in the late 50s and 60s. Have you had access to that?
Yes, the list of translations that I showed is from Al-Qazi Theatre Archives, but the focus over there is on Al-Qazi's work.
Yeah.
And he has worked at institutional level when it comes to Brecht. And I wanted to know what was happening outside the institution as well. I mean, NST signifies a very central role, but there were a lot of things happening which were never documented in India.
Thank you so much for the interesting insight into a world of theater that is also not known to me at all, and I learned many new things. So thanks a lot for that. I have also 3 remarks, but I'm trying to be quick. The first one is, are you planning on any endeavors to look into researching spectatorship? Because I'm wondering very much, and I think it would be so interesting to know more about how the audiences of these performances were receiving what they were seeing, depending on what locations they were performed in. But because you also mentioned university campuses was one side, but there was also independent theaters and then maybe bigger stages. And that would be, I think, very enlightening to the project. And I'm not saying this to give you another task, but I would be fascinated by hearing more about it. The second one is I wanted also to address Micha's question about the dissonance. In the paper, you mentioned that the names of the characters in one of the translations were kept in the original. Yeah. And I find that highly fascinating and irritating, because that must have been such an experience of what the hell? What the hell are these names? So I think there's a potential in looking at this choice, at this decision to keep the names in the original language. And the last one is about the church religion sacristai thing. The Bentley traditions translate sacristai with church. That, of course, is highly problematic, because a sacristai is not the space of the church as such, but the space that is located next to the church, where priests get ready for service. Yeah. So it is a completely different thing than the church.
But it got completely different in Hindi, and it became religion.
in a sense, the Hindi version, to call it religion, is in a way closer to sacristy than churches. So I find that very interesting as well, because then, I mean, we can see the English translation is also already very problematic.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I think that is why I wanted to highlight in the beginning that it is translation of a translation and not from original, because it's very important to put that out there. With the first question of yours, with the names, I think this was the script that you're talking about, and this was in 1982. And keeping the name helps to bypass the censorship that was happening. You know, it's like, you're not directly questioning the authority. It's Brecht's play, it's not ours. So, but if you, like, I also gave a contrast to that, to compare it, that around the same time an adaptation happened of Brecht, and that was banned, but the translation was not. It bypassed the censorship, because it's not directly attacking anyone, and so it's a very smart way to do that. Audience, that's my last chapter, actually. Yeah, translation, adaptation, and audience. But with audience reception, because it's a very diverse audience, and I'm sticking just to Hindi theatre in particular places, and that is going to be one interesting chapter, dealing with the different audience, because there's urban audience, there's rural audience, there's one happening in the proscenium stage, there's one happening in open-air theatres, in university spaces. Outside of university spaces, the script changes, because you cannot be that radical. You have to filter it down for the public, otherwise you might get lynched. So, yeah, that is a very interesting thing to observe with the audience. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your paper. And I was just thinking, even with the explanations you just gave, when Micha Brown was asking you about the target language, it is the question of origin, or the target language, which is, looked at translation. First, the fact that they are translating from English means, it's not about the target language of German in any kind of distanciation or changing of the Hindu language, but it is really translating kind of the concepts, and also doing something with them, because you clearly showed that there was a political reason why they chose these very plays. And I think we're kind of quite far from Benjamin's philological endeavor, which is kind of enriching translation discussions even today, but is kind of slightly bypassed when you're doing theater, which is supposed to reach a specific or various audiences who have to relate to what you're telling them. So I think you pointed that out quite nicely without answering the question.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, that is a very interesting fact that I came across. So the other theater director that I interviewed, which is not here, and he did adaptation of Brecht's plays, and he said that I'm not concerned with what Brecht was doing over there or what's happening in English. I'm doing it for my audience. And what matters to me is the core political concept. So at the end of the day, it's for my audience. And I think that's very interesting to notice.